Next one is human communication is a system of rules. So what's a rule we have for communicating? What are you supposed to do in a classroom if you want to communicate? What you learn in kindergarten, first grade? Raise your hand, right? You still have to do that when you get to college? Yes. Not really. I guess it depends on the person. I don't want to say you don't have to, because then you'll say, you'll have some professor who wants you to do that, and you'll say, well, Mr. Nessa, we don't have to do that. No. You don't have to in this class, so. This is communication class, so I like it when people talk. You don't have to raise your hand, but that's certainly a rule that we learned, right? It's a rule for communicating. What kind of rules do your parents teach you about communicating?
See, I still do this.
Still do it? Oh, that's
yeah. Well, they tell like when my mom talks to me, when I was a little kid, she would tell me not to talk when she's talking.
Okay. Don't interrupt me. Right? Don't interrupt. That's one of the things. What else?
Tone of voice.
Tone of voice. What's your? Don't you take that tone with me. So your parents taught you how to communicate in an appropriate fashion with authority. Yes. You're here, Rebecca.
I say wait for your turn.
Wait for your turn, right? There is a turn-taking behavior that goes on in communication. It's part of the process. There's some turn-taking going on there, and we don't like it if somebody takes our turn. Don't talk back to me, right? So we know lots of rules, don't we? And those are all kind of social rules. They're all very important things that we have to know in order to communicate effectively. But on a more pragmatic or basic level, we have some rules about communication, some things that we have to do. And if we don't follow these rules, we're just not going to be able to communicate at all. What kind of rules are those? What about, to give you an example, what is one of the rules we have for communicating is called syntax. And what is the rule of syntax? What does that mean?
Like your word choice?
Kind of. More specific. More than word choice, it's word what? Order. Who said order? Very good. Word order, right? In other words, when I form a sentence, the words have to go in a certain order, don't they? How many of you have seen Star Wars movies? You know who Yoda is?
Yeah.
What does Yoda do when he's talking? Talks backwards. He gets the words all jumbled around in the wrong order, right? And since it's just Yoda doing it, it's okay. We can understand, right? Excuse me. But what would happen if everybody did that? If everybody just put the words in any order they wanted, anytime they wanted, any way they wanted. If we all just formed sentences different ways, would we be able to communicate? It'd be chaos, wouldn't it? Nobody, if it was different every time, we'd have to do that. So how did you learn this rule for syntax? Anybody here have small kids, like between, say, 2 and 5? Gary, you do? You have a son or a daughter?
Daughter.
Daughter, how old is she?
She's going to turn 3 at the end of this month.
3 at the end of this month. Okay, so is she starting now to communicate pretty effectively?
She started at 1.
She started at 1. Okay. So how do they learn that? When your daughter makes a sentence, and I realize that 3 years old, maybe not perfect yet, but does she use syntax fairly correctly most of the time? It's the words in the right order. So how did she learn to do that? Do you take a little 2 or 3 year old kid and sit down with them and say, here's a grammar book, let me teach you about syntax? Listen to adults. Okay, so how does that help?
You speak properly, correct? Speak out that.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, are you saying that they just mimic,
They absorb.
or they apply the rule? Because syntax is a rule of communication. So when a 3-year-old puts a sentence together, if a 3-year-old says, Mommy, can you get me some water? Is that correct syntax? They don't say water, get, Mommy, me. Right? They put it together correctly. So they're applying the rule for syntax. So how did they know that the words went in that order? How did they know that?
Regurgitation.
So you think they're just mimicking? If that's true, I have to unpack this a little bit. If that's true, what that would mean is that they basically have to memorize every sentence they ever heard. Say, you know what, I might need that someday, so I'm going to say it. If I need it, I'll pull it out and use it later. But that's really not what they do, because they can put together a whole new sentence that they never heard anybody say before, right? Even at 3 or 4 years old, they can do that. Do you agree? So if they're doing that, if they're putting together a whole new sentence, forming a sentence or a paragraph, whatever, that they never heard anybody say before, and speaking it and using syntax correctly, or at least close to correctly, that means they're applying the rule. So it goes back to my original question, which is, how did they learn the rule? You didn't sit down with a book and read it to them and teach them how they learn the rule. The scholar Noam Chomsky, who is one of the world's leading experts in language acquisition, developed what he calls the critical period theory. And according to Chomsky, in his research in how we acquire language and how we learn language, we are hardwired from birth with a knowledge of the rules of language and how to use language. Again, remember, human beings use language differently and in a way that no other animal on the planet can use language. How many of you speak more than one language? Okay. How many of you that speak more than one language have always spoken more than one language, as long as you can remember, since you were grown up? Okay. Anybody learned a second language as an adult? How easy was that?
Hard.
It's very difficult, isn't it?
It depends on you.
That's what Chomsky's talking about in that critical period theory. As he said, from birth till about 7 or 8 years old, we're hardwired with this innate knowledge of the rules of language. So if you expose little kids to language, they soak it up like a sponge, right? How many of you know kids that speak 3 or 4 different languages? Anybody? My wife is Filipino in the Philippines. There's lots of different languages and dialects. My wife speaks 7 languages. 6 or 7, I think it's 7. Maybe 6. Anyway, yeah, lots of different dialects. And they say dialects, but the truth of the matter is, in many cases, they're really just different languages. So what do you call somebody who speaks 2 languages? And somebody who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. Somebody who only speaks 1 language? Americans. So if you have kids, what should you do? Expose them to lots of different languages, right? Because they'll learn them and soak them up.